A film within a film, Ed Wood by Tim Burton. I really liked it. What were your thoughts?
Oh, I think it was bafflingly brilliant. Of course, right off the bat, if you take away anything from this film, which most people take away, mastery, even the harshest, most critical Tim Burton naysayer will say, except for Ed Wood. Ed Wood's fantastic. Ed Wood's great. Which makes sense to me on a certain level, but also just baffles me on another one because it is essentially your typical Tim Burton film. And to me, a typical Tim Burton film is a pretty brilliant film that champions misfit visions. But if you walk away from this film with nothing gained from the messaging, from the point of the film itself, its technical, its photography, its black and white photography is completely stunning. That is the first thing that really sucks you into it, is that Tim Burton is a master of photography and certainly a master of black and white photography. You're going to hear me say master a lot. A master of contrast, of light, of white, of black, of shadows, of shadow play, of emotionality, of pantomime, of staging, of choreography, of montage. He's absolutely brilliant behind the camera on this film. It's some of the greatest composition I've seen from the 90s. I think it's one of the best looking films of the 90s. I think it's the grammar, the screen grammar is just wonderfully made. And of course, you do get the remnants that we see in things like Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice, Sweeney Todd. You do get the remnants of German Expressionism and remnants of monster movies. But except in this film, it's, like you said, a film within a film. So it's distanced. So the stylistic interplay is distanced and not entirely interwoven, yet the film takes on aspects of the fairy tale in spite of itself. Or not in spite of itself. It fully embraces it happily, and that's when it shows you its true self, rather. It's in the film's final moments where it becomes pure fantasy, where it becomes this film that just embraces all delusional misfits out there.
You know what's interesting about this film? It had a budget of $18 million and a bomb in the box office of $5.9 million.
It was
It's like anything you talk about when it comes to Ed Wood is just a black hole of terrible.
Oh, and apologies for the cough. I'll probably cough a few times. You see, the temperature dropped a few degrees here in Florida, and everyone got the flu simultaneously. But it was a critical darling, though. I mean, Martin Landau, who played Bela Lugosi, I believe he won an Oscar. I believe he received so much praise and so much recognition for that role, and I think with good purpose. And this film is truly extraordinary because it gets down to, for the majority of the film, it is almost ridiculing Ed Wood. It is really putting up a magnifying glass to his character flaw, which is insincerity, which is delusion. Maybe being delusional makes you insincere. Maybe they're married in that sort of way. And it wraps up with Vincent D'Onofrio cameoing as Orson Welles, and it, like I said, it turns into pure fantasy. And I think Tim Burton makes a stand and makes a statement that Ed Wood's vision is worth fighting for. And I think in the end, although during the film we've been supported, we've been prodded to laugh at Ed Wood's complete ineptitude when it comes to the craft of filmmaking. Yeah. And in the last 10 minutes, I believe that Tim Burton shows us what is so charming about it. And what's charming is another thing, another important kind of theme that we see throughout most of Tim Burton's work, which is the idea of a family structure, the idea of an unconventional and untraditional family structure. And it's a family structure that Ed Wood basically organized, that Ed Wood basically created for himself. He has a family structure, and these films are charming because they are of a pure vision. That pure vision may be purely trash, but it's a completely necessary one, and it's a completely singular one. He is singularly terrible.
Yeah, and I would like to elaborate on that because Ed Wood was more inexperienced. That's what the ineptitude is, rather than an incompetence. And that kind of demarcation is important to make note of because an inexperience is someone who thinks they know what they're doing but doesn't. Whereas an incompetence is an inability. Clearly, Ed Wood has the ability because he's able to influence people into his delusions, talk them into the delusion of making a box office budget film and completely failing at doing
Well,
that.
see, I think he has a strength at building a family structure,
Yeah.
a family structure of misfits. I think in the beginning, his filmmaking was poor because of inexperience, but we saw him make like 3 or 4 films in this particular biopic. It does become like ineptitude. It does become just he has an inability to make good films in the end because he looks through the monitor and says, "Oh, that's great, that's fine." Takes one take and there's a million mistakes during them. But I mean, of course, Tim Burton. The last 10 minutes, we see what Ed Wood sees. We see that delusion. And what it becomes is not necessarily delusion anymore because Ed Wood really isn't seeing a brilliant picture to Ed Wood is really like a document like of the fact that all of these people that he loves and he admires, he respects, and it's a mutual reciprocal thing. In one picture, he's watching his family on screen, and that's why that means so much to him. I mean, it blurs the lines between being exploitative with Bela Lugosi, even though Bela wouldn't have cared. He would have supported that exploitation. But we see what Ed Wood sees, and what Ed Wood sees is invaluable. I don't think he sees his own genius or his own mastery, at least through Tim Burton's vision of what Ed Wood sees. I think Ed Wood sees people that he cares about, or at least I would hope, right? Like almost a myth of Sisyphus type of thing. I think Burton says one must imagine Ed Wood happy. I think I would have to agree with that.
Yeah, because ultimately this is a Tim Burton film. And even though he is the uh, central role, Ed Wood is that person being discussed in the film. You do have Tim Burton's impression upon it. And I do like that you elaborated on that.
Oh yeah, and like the people who say that they're not fans of Tim Burton, but they love Ed Wood, this film is very much a Burton film. There are similar thematics. There's similar scene composition. There's similar melodramatic acting. There's similar artistry. It is very obviously by the same premier auteur. But maybe in this film, it's easier to identify with because, like I said, there is that stylistic distance. There is a separation. Although there's not so much a separation for Ed Wood as a human being. So while the film itself might be stylistically distanced from monster movies while at the same time showcasing them, showcasing like certain components of the monster film, Ed Wood himself, I don't think, because we discussed what film actually means to Ed Wood can't tell the difference between sincerity and insincerity, what is being photographed and what is actually being experienced. Because I think at least Tim Burton posits that to Ed Wood, they're one and the same, that maybe something isn't experienced until it's photographed, and that's maybe why he had to film Bela Lugosi for no apparent purpose, just to document his final few days, it felt like, on his doorstep. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's incredible. And this also had an incredible supporting cast. I mean, Sarah Jessica Parker was wonderful. Bill Murray, hilarious. He was actually hilarious in this film. I think everyone's a fan of Bill Murray, though. I thought he was great. Like I said, Vince D'Onofrio gave an intensely good Orson Welles cameo, and Lisa Marie as Vampira. Whew! That's one smoking hot lady, everybody. And I think she did phenomenally well in her role in this capacity. Her capacity in other Burton films are rather limited in their expression. I mean, she's a model first and foremost in roles like Sleepy Hollow or Mars Attacks. She's unforgettable in those films. I mean, she's what I think of when I think of Mars Attacks, with the skin falling off of her face, exposing the green beneath it. But in this film, I think she's actually incredible, like a true vampira. I loved her. Lisa Marie was one of my favorite things about this film, but from a performance standpoint, Johnny Depp blew me away. He absolutely did. I thought and of course he's on camera more than anyone else. He's in every single scene. He was just absolutely extraordinary to me. I really think he understood this character, and more importantly than that, and I think really speaks to the bond that Burton and him have formed over the past 30 years, is that he absolutely understood what Tim Burton's vision was going to be, what his aims were, what his messaging was, what he wanted to achieve with this film, and Johnny Depp really elevates this material even beyond what Tim Burton even achieved.
So, something that I think is really emblematic of how great Tim Burton is, and why it was really good that he juxtaposed that with Ed Wood and how Ed Wood did his films, is that Tim Burton's very self-aware. When he comes to making any film, doing his decisions, you can see there's a lot of concern with the decision-making process. And throughout the film of Ed Wood, we see Johnny Depp playing those decisions out, and they're the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
Completely just, all right, cut, it's good. And then, the last film, Plan 9 from Outer Space, that's being played out, the Baptist church leaders literally criticize him and say, do you know anything about filmmaking at all?
He has Johnny Depp adds a remarkable dynamism to these films. On this channel, we one of my favorite ways to view films is through a scope of static being or dynamic becoming films. Static being films kind of retain a story over time. There's an objective, deliberate purpose to them, whereas dynamic becoming films have the ability to adapt and change as you adapt and change as well. Like, they kind of speak to new generations in different ways that weren't necessarily intended by their makers. Now, I think most Tim Burton films, if not all of them, compositionally are intended to be static being. I absolutely believe that. But I absolutely believe that Tim Burton is a genius, and he's brilliant, and he doesn't want his films to be limited in any sort of way, even by his own complete daring and mastery. So he focuses on these muses like Johnny Depp, like Helena Bonham Carter and Lisa Marie. He focuses on these people who he knows has this ability, this screen ability, to elevate the material they're in into something that is truly dynamic, into something that is partly unexpected, but I think entirely beautiful.
So really. You think Ed Wood's a dynamic becoming film?
I think that all of his films are constructed to be static being films, but there's always this ingredient, there's always this quality, and the quality normally comes from whoever his muse happens to be in that period of time. Most recently it's like Eva Green, but traditionally, we're talking Johnny Depp, Lisa Marie, and Helena Bonham Carter, or even Michael Keaton, you could argue for as well. But I think that he puts those very interesting and captivating people into his films to give his films a kind of dynamic quality, almost an unearthly quality, an intuitive quality. Because there's so much intuition, I feel like, in Johnny Depp's performance. It is performative, but it's, to me, extremely layered. Like, it's fascinating to consider what is at the heart of the character Ed Wood, and when he's being insincere, and then you realize that his insincerity is his authenticity because he can't tell the difference between either.
So what you're really saying is, it's not black and white. You see what I did? Sorry.
Absolutely what you did. This is just, it's a brilliant film. Another one of those Burton films that calls out like a beacon. Like, it calls out like it's radio signals to eccentric misfits all over the globe, and so many people respond to it. And I think respond for good purpose and for a healthy purpose as well. These are positive films. Even something like like Edward Scissorhands is a tragedy comparatively, whereas Ed Wood is a triumph.
A triumph within a tragedy.
Well,
I mean,
it had everything going for
it
it to be a tragedy, but those last 10 minutes are so deliberately triumphant.
Yeah, because he lived on. He was lived on past his filmmaking. He was a person, not a filmmaker. He was his own being.
Well, I think the whole thing is that in Tim Burton's universe, being a human being and being a filmmaker for Ed Wood was the same thing. And I think he's fascinated by creativity and the creative spirit and the creative spirit's place within the human condition. And I think he agrees with Orson Welles that all visions are worth fighting for, because I think he doesn't feed off of, that sounds parasitic. I think he's extremely intrigued by creativity.
Even if it's
even if it's trash.
Yeah, even if it's trash.
Even if it's absolutely trash, garbage.
Yeah, because I saw several scenes from Plan 9 from Outer Space. And I just couldn't stop laughing.
It's a garbage film, but I think those garbage films have a charm. I would have to agree with Tim Burton. Certainly those drive-in throwaway movies definitely have a very specific and peculiar, almost baffling charm to them. And
the fishing pole with the UFO on fire.
I mean, if we can respect people like Orson Welles, Hitchcock, or Kubrick for being, the so-called greatest filmmakers of all time, then an equal amount of curiosity has to be extended to the people who have made the worst ones. That there must be there must be something to it. You have to have an extreme talent to be able to make Citizen Kane. And you have to have something maybe even more rare to make Plan 9 from Outer Space. Such a travesty, such a piece of trash. And then repeat the process. And then repeat the process. And not improve. Ever. Yet, it's not about an artistic improvement. Where Ed Wood's greatest creativity was, where it laid was in the people he surrounded himself with, and in, I think, the glow that he found in these misfit junkies and alcoholics.
Yeah. And I know you do like to talk more romantic about it, but I did want to take a moment to take a more critical approach to what's being said there in certain aspects, because Tim Burton's also saying something else. Part of his reasoning for making Ed Wood was to show what you shouldn't do at the same time as what you should do when making a film. And not necessarily because obviously there's rule breaking and that can make a message, but what Tim Burton's saying here is he's saying, if you want to break a rule, have a good reason to break the rule. Right? Whereas Ed Wood kind of just does it to, as you say, please the people around him, be more trying to be sincere in his own insincere way of making other people happy, so that way he can be happy. And really that's what Ed Wood's trying to do. He's trying to be happy in his own way, and unfortunately ends up kind of backfiring in a lot of ways. And Tim Burton sees that, and he's kind of making that meta-commentary right there. And several of the scenes, some of them stand out. In particular, though, when he finds out that Bela Lugosi is shooting up heroin. He does eventually admit him into the rehab, but he doesn't do it right away. Right? And that was really sad and tragic, but at the same time, I think he's a beautiful person that he's trying to, in his own crippled way, help him out. And whereas Tim Burton recognizes that eventually he does have to show that decision was a flawed one. And then that same decision-making process, like you said, blends in from the personal life of Ed Wood into the filmmaking of Ed Wood. And you see that same inability in those respects, the inability to make a distinction. And whereas Tim Burton himself has the opposite, he is very contemplative with his decisions. And so he has, instead, Johnny Depp and Sarah Jessica Parker playing out the role of him revealing Ed Wood's cross-dressing. And then you have that juxtaposed in the same exact frame of him going onto camera and blending all of it together. Ed Wood, I mean, blending it all together. And you can see that Tim Burton's trying to make the distinction between self-aware choices in filmmaking and not self-aware choices. And that's really, really well said.
No, true. I do think, it's Ed Wood's flaw, and also one of his strengths is that he's not incredibly judgmental. You can argue that he's exploitative, sure, but he's in L.A., you know, that's almost how everyone is. I think that when he finds, about Bela's drug addiction, which he was so oblivious to, and he should have caught on to it far sooner, but as we've covered, he has no self-awareness, let alone the ability to really gain any sort of insight into someone he's talking to beyond what's at the surface, really. I think that, like Bella's character flaw was his drug abuse, and Vampira's character flaw was her egotism, and like Bill Murray's character flaw was his hubris and the hot air that would just exude from his lungs whenever he would speak. Ed Wood's character flaw was his lack of self-awareness, which made him at least appear to be completely insincere. And maybe another character flaw was his ineptitude as an artist. But I think another part of what Tim Burton's saying on top of that is that maybe certain character flaws are unchangeable as well. And that you need to find a group of people who accept you for who you are. I'm not saying that find a group of people who accept you being a morphine junkie. I'm not saying that. I don't think Tim Burton's exactly saying that.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either. I agree with where you're going, though.
Yeah. But just, it's a family structure. And just people have to accept you warts and all, and help you when you really need it, when you absolutely need it. But I'm not sure if friends need you to judge them.
Yeah.
When Sarah Jessica Parker made her exit, she said incredibly judgmental things in her criticisms as she was leaving. Like, this is a terrible movie. Why are you all making this god-awful movie? You're talentless. This is crazy. You're crazy for wearing women's clothes. And I think that was the kind of most obscene thing you could do to Ed Wood and that group of people, is to judge them for their misfit characteristics that make them as unique as they are. It might not make them brilliant, and it might not make them particularly inspirational people, but it makes them individuals. It makes them have a vision that is uniquely their own. Once again, even if that vision is absolute garbage.
Yeah, I mean, we do want to observe all of our own character flaws. I have them.
Oh,
but
you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Tim Burton, like I said, he was goading us into laughing at him for an hour 45 minutes. Like, he wants us to laugh at Ed Wood's complete ineptitude in nearly every area of his life, his ineffectuality. Wants us to laugh at every delusional thing that he does because he is being absurd. And Tim Burton wants us to do that, and that's why it's a bit more contemplative. And then I think Tim Burton, the director, contemplated and said, no, there's something worth championing here. And
do you think that's his ultimate decision for making this?
Because, if you know about the real Ed Wood, the alcoholism, no one loved him in life, no one loved him in death. It'd be very difficult to make Ed Wood have a happy ending, and Tim Burton did it. Tim Burton found the thing to champion about this fairy tale, about this fable that is based on a true story, but found the thing he wanted to express to his audience. Because Tim Burton is a misfit auteur. He didn't want to convey judgmental behaviors to his audience. He didn't want to tell his audience to be more normal, to follow the rules or to temper down your uniqueness. He definitely didn't want to say that. And in the end, he didn't.
Why do you think he made Sarah Jessica Parker do that? Made that decision through Dolores?
Well, I think that, it's also, it's complicated by the fact that Ed Wood sold her leading role for $300 to some pretty lady at a bar, it's complicated by Ed Wood's own delusions. But I think that, she left the group, she left the family, she excommunicated herself from that situation and went on to write very traditional Elvis Presley songs and make good money at it and get good recognition for it. But I don't know if Tim Burton thinks that's truthful or authentic, but I also don't think he's judging Sarah Jessica Parker either. Yeah. For that decision. But I think he had to show that's the one faux pas, that's the one thing you don't do to this group of misfits, is to point out why they're so unsuccessful, why they're losers. You don't do that, because I think at the end of the day they're all aware, except for Ed Wood. That's the magic of Ed. But the rest of them all know they're washed up in a certain capacity. Bela Lugosi lets it go. He breaks the spell all the time, and it makes Ed Wood seem slightly uncomfortable.
I can agree to that. That's really beautifully said. I never even saw it that way.
I do think, for the most part, Tim Burton is an optimist, and this is certainly an optimistic film. It is, and it has no right being optimistic either. Like I said, it should be a tragedy.
It definitely felt like it was.
I think in any other filmmaker's hands, it would have been a tragedy. It would have ended with him drinking himself to death in obscurity, never having the self-awareness to realize that it's a fool's errand, that he doesn't have the ability or knowledge, the experience to make these films. But it doesn't. It actually makes you want to see him make more and more. It makes him smile. It makes him manically happy. Seeing the world through Ed Wood's eyes is quite dazzling. Yeah, I'm pretty floored by the movie. David, I want to thank you for watching this one with me, man.
Yeah, thanks for showing
it. I had a lot of fun with this one. It was good. It was good. By good, I mean great. Now let's go watch Plan 9 from Outer Space. No, I'm sorry, everybody. We're not going to be covering Ed Wood films. But, no, this is a phenomenal film. In the comments, leave what you thought of the film. Like I said, this tends to be the one that people hold in really high regard, like Big Fish, even like Edward Scissorhands in a way. Ed Wood seems to be really high up there. 94 was a wonderful year for American films, and this is certainly proof positive, a testament to the brilliance of the young directors of the early 90s.